suppose I can shut off. Oh, look at that. It shut itself off. I love it. Welcome, one and all. I am your lovable host, Danny K. You have joined SonicFlare and Steve Evans from Perfect Vinyl Forever. If you guys remember, we did a quick show on the latest mountain bike action. Just kidding. On record cleaning and the process of record cleaning about 2-3 weeks ago. I'm wearing my combat outfit, Zelensky, mini Zelensky. The only thing we're missing are the billions from the U.S. government to fund the war efforts. That said, I welcome Steve Evans, Perfect Vinyl Forever, to the show.
Hey,
Steve, how are you?
I'm doing great. How's yourself?
Fantastic, man. I am enjoying a nice peach vodka. Not to call it screwdriver, but same thing. And we are going to be talking about a fantastic topic today, part 2, I guess, if you want to call it that, of our last spiel, which was warped records. Goodness gracious.
Yes.
It seems like
pandemic
it's
all over again.
Story. What the hell's going on here? I thought records are perfect. Sorry, that was CDs. CDs are perfect.
That's right. Yeah, it's man, a lot of warped records out there, and it does seem like a lot of new releases when they're coming through are coming through with moderate to significant warps. You know, and it doesn't matter which price point you're at with records. I got a good example. I waited many years, like 5 years, to get this beautiful box set. Analog Productions, Bill Evans, Riverside Recording. This is a holy grail for me. He's not only do we share the same surname, but it's my favorite jazz musician of all time. So I missed out on the release back when they were merely $400. But fortunately, in 2022, Analog Productions released the set once again at $900. I receive it. This is like Christmas in November. Excited, put it on my turntable. And what do we see? Well, let's switch over to some interesting video. And here is a warped record from the set.
Gracious. But
this is
wait a minute.
That's a mild dish warp.
You're telling me that the $900 box set from Acoustic Sounds pressed at RTI for this round, well, I guess for the first round as well. I guess QRP was overloaded, so he switched that to RTI. You're telling me that a $900 box set is warped records? What's the world coming?
Well, unfortunately, even the top quality pressing plants are stretched pretty thin. And I think they're trying to save minutes off of each record. It might not be truly fully cooled once it's removed from the press and you're getting some warpage. Right now, I'm cleaning a set for a client that was sent in last week. 15 of the 22 records are being flattened. 11 of them have significant enough issues that it affects playback. The other 4, they're slight, but heck, I have them here, so I flatten them for them.
You're kidding me. 15 of the 22 records are seriously warped? That's insane. Wow.
I flattened every one of mine in my box set, but I happen to have 4 orb record flatteners. So as they say, I know a guy and I can take care of my issues easily. Unfortunately, consumers... Yeah, right. Unfortunately, consumers have a more difficult choice.
Yep, that's incredible. Look, I sent you my Bill Evans box set as well. I don't remember if you remember whether or not it was warped or not. Of course, I haven't set anything up here yet to play music, and so I'm kind of like the gullible collector. I'm hoping that it all works out, but I'm assuming it's fine. Man, I guess first of all, in addition to the services you provide of cleaning the records,
Right.
you actually pinged me a couple of years ago and were like, hey, by the way, I can, fix your warp records as well. And, I guess pivoting off to a tangent now, the worst warp record that I sent you was one of my favorites. It was James Bond for, gosh, what was the title? James Bond for lovers, or James Bond for readers, or something like that. I'll try to find the title. It was so awfully warped that I literally couldn't track it with any of my arms. And I sent it to you fully expecting you to come back and be like, dude, Danny, this is so damn warped. Forget it. Just use the cover. And lo and behold, you continue to surprise, Steve, because when I got the record back, I don't think you quite managed to get the full warp out, but it was so much dramatically improved that I was actually able to play it back without issues. So
that's awesome.
Welcome to a new service.
Yeah, we offer the service for $12 per record. Like I said, we have 4 orb flattening machines. They cost between $1,500 and $1,600 a piece. The process takes 4 to 8 to 16 hours, depending on how many cycles it takes to truly get the records flat. At some point in time, you have to look at the record and say, if I try to get it more true than what it is after a couple of cycles, you may start to damage the record. So we may not have it perfectly flat for some of those more extreme records. But if it's not playable after we flatten it, we refund the charges, or we don't charge for the service. So we absorb some of the risk ourselves. The one thing is, I get questions all the time. Can you just clean and flatten one record? Unfortunately, because we are designed to have a commercial level throughput for our cleaning services, we can only flatten records that we've cleaned. So it has to be part of a 16 or 32 or 64 cleaning package. And then you can have us flatten any number of those records for you. So that's just a little bit of a compromise to have PVF flatten records. So keep that in mind if you're interested in using our service.
Got it. Look, I think in the grand scheme of things, sending you 16 records at this point, especially if you've been tuning in to this, these sessions with Steve over the last year or so that we've been doing too. This is the third one now. I think you're by now either convinced that Steve is either full of shit or that he's actually doing what he says he does, which is really dramatically improve the playback fidelity of your records, whether they're old or brand new, through his PVF service. And I personally have, I don't even know what the tab is now. I mean, we're probably up to 1,000. No, probably not 1,000, maybe close to 1,000 records that you've cleaned for me.
Yeah, I think we're close to 700-800 records at this point.
Yeah, which is insane, as my wife would say. But look, your stuff works. It's magical. And the fact that you're adding warp services or de-warp services, I think is fantastic. And I'll do my best to cue the warp factor 10 into the link right here, right now, so we can go all warp speed engage. That said, what the question that pops up is, and by the way, we're doing this for the very first time via StreamYard. Forgive me if I misclick some of the you can actually, it's like a stage manager. We're moving into grand production territory here. And so I kind of have to manually look at the screen and look at my phone as I'm doing the video and seeing what screen I'm going to show blow up. Anyway, the thing that people always ask me, frankly, Johnny, is what is the big deal about warped records? And the way that I look at it is, if you kind of do a sort of high level overview, you have to keep in mind a couple of things, and I'm sure that you're gonna, probably have been asked, or you've probably been asked the same question many times, which is if you keep in mind the fact that the G forces enacting on a stylus in your cartridge are anywhere from 600 to 1200 Gs, depending on the frequency. And I'm not kidding, this is absolutely true. Adding warp, or adding the tracking of a warped record, amplifies that by several orders of magnitude. And so basically the problem becomes that you're wearing out your stylus a lot quicker because it has to track these up and down undulations and bouncing. Two, you're now running into the issue of, well, if you have a poorly designed tone arm and a poorly designed suspension design on your cartridge, it now exacerbates all those negatives of their design element and amplifies it. And essentially the net effect is you're basically using up your cartridge a lot more quickly than otherwise if you're playing back a very warped record or a mildly warped record. And so I always tell people, I'm like, dude, try to get it flattened. Fortunately, you can get it flattened, obviously through services like yours, but it is a big deal, right? And I wish we had the microscopic capability of showing what happens in the suspension when you're playing back a warped record. You'd be like, holy shit, this is insane, right? I can't believe I'm subjecting my poor cartridge, whether it's, a $100 Ortophon that comes stock on your Rega, or similar, entry-level turntable, or a $15,000-$20,000 cartridge at the other end of the extreme. The G forces are the same, right? So anyway,
we do have a way to measure it, Danny, though. And it's those incredibly sensitive instruments that are on either side of our head. So if you're listening to a warped record that has a lot of sustained notes, maybe orchestral, maybe, it's kind of some solo piano stuff, and you've got your stylus that's tracking up and down a warp. Well, on the upswing, as it's going through the warp, it's actually traveling slightly faster than on the level plane of the record. So that sustained note will change pitch. And that is, it doesn't need to be a real significant warp for that to be noticed. Same thing with an off-center center hole on an LP, that in and out action of the tone arm side loads within the groove, and it will distort left and right channels significant enough that you can hear it, and it doesn't require an ultra high-end cartridge and playback system.
Absolutely. Steve, what are the causes of warped records? What's the story?
So, I mean, it can start all the way back at the pressing plants. You may have heard this vicious rumor, Danny, that with the rapid increase in sales in vinyl, that some of the pressing plants, maybe all the pressing plants, are operating at maximum capacity and stretching their capacity a little bit. Yeah. Oh. I know. Breaking news. You got to play the breaking news music in the background for that.
Hold on. Here it is. Breaking news. Cartridge.
There you go.
Record pressing plants over the world over are in high demand. Breaking news. SonicFlare.
Breaking news. You heard it here for the 700th time. You heard it here. 701st time on SonicFlare. Well, no, but seriously, I mean, anytime a process, a company, a manufacturing line gets stressed, more quality control variables get interjected. And, having records that Maybe they're trying to get them out of the press 30 seconds quicker, and they're not quite down to temperature because they're trying to get another, 10 records pressed per hour. The record might be a little bit softer, and then it's not fully settled in.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's issues that start from when the record is being manufactured. But then there's all the other variables that can be applied to records during its life cycle. So things like exposing records to heat. I think we understand that pretty well. I've had people who've sent us records that left them on the back of their parcel shelf on their automobile or in their trunk, and got really exposed to a significant amount of heat. And that causes them to warp, sometimes an edge warp, if it's like only centered in a very specific part of the record. If it's a dish warp, the record was subjected to heat evenly. So there's those unfortunate handling issues that could cause warps. But there are some that can be controlled, and a lot has to do with storage. So for instance, I think most people know to store their records vertically, not horizontally. That way, the load forces on the record over time are less conducive to causing storage warps. But here's one thing that I want to stand on a soapbox and discuss, and that is shrink wrap. I can't tell you how frustrated I get when I see a listing on Discogs and they're saying, 30-year-old record still in original shrink wrap. That's a really bad thing. And here's exactly. Here's why. Shrink wrap has value for one reason only, and that is to show whether or not that record has ever been played, or opened and then potentially played. So from that point, the value of shrink wrap disappears. Now, the consequence of keeping shrink wrap increases over time, because shrink wrap, as it prominently promises in the name of the product, continues to shrink with age, even if it's not exposed to the heat that made it shrink around the record jacket in the first place.
Wow.
So often I will get from clients records that are sealed, 30-year-old records still sealed in the original shrink wrap, which the shrink that point still has value because it's a sealed record. But you can look at the jacket itself, and that shrink wrap continued to shrink over time, and you can see the record jacket and therefore the record inside of it bow, and that gradual shrinking causes warped records, and I ultimately have flatten them. Now, they tend to be dish warps, which are easier to get out, and we'll talk about the different types of warps in a moment. But please, Discog sellers, record resellers, stop advertising still in original shrink wrap if the record's been open as a positive attribute. And record buyers, please stop putting a value or premium on original shrink. There's no upside. Plus, it also,
gentlemen, you've heard it here first. We just dropped the value of all for sale records on Discogs in shrink wrap by a factor of 2.
Well, you drop their value by $12 because then you're going to have to send them to me, and I'll charge you $12, and then I'll send you flat records back.
I honestly, I had no idea. Look, I go by the old adage of, shrink, still in shrink, again, raises the value of the record. And you can clearly see that if you just do a search on Discogs or eBay based on shrink records versus non-shrink wrap records. I didn't know that. That's interesting. So even 30, 40, 50 years on, after the fact, it's still the process, I guess, is still at work.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
And very, very closely related to that is all the fancy packaging that the records are, higher end records or special editions are being released. Do you know why I think our Bill Evans box sets are being warped? This very lovely slip jacket, I think, is the culprit, because these records are packaged very tightly in this
Wow.
slip cover. I
Yep,
mean,
I
it's
see
not
that. Yep.
easy to
Yep.
get them out.
Yep.
I think
Interesting.
if they would have just put a 1/16 of an inch tolerance around the slip jacket, it
Interesting.
probably would have avoided all the warping that I've had to flatten for clients. You can take that and extrapolate it to the record stiffeners and all the other things that MoFi tends to put in their gatefold jackets. Box sets aren't so bad because there tends to be a little more space in there. So all the different pamphlets and books and bonus CDs that you get in a high-end box set, LP box set, tends to be a little less impactful. But slip covers, overstuffed gatefold jackets, etc. Really, you should be packaging your records with enough breathing room as possible. And I go so far that if you want to put it in an aftermarket sleeve, and it's really important for you to keep the original inner sleeve, then use an outer sleeve and put the original inner sleeve and other, download cards and other things that could be causing additional pressure on the album itself. Put those between the outer sleeve and the record jacket, and you're going to reduce your risks significantly.
Wow. That's incredible. Frankly, very educational, even for me, an avid collector. But so I guess, I mean, what's the solution then? Obviously you mentioned, keep your records stored flat, or excuse me, horizontally as opposed to vertically, which I think pretty much most people know about.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the fact of these super tightly packaged box sets like the Bill Evans one. I guess take them out of the box maybe, or let me ask you this. This is an interesting thought. So, can you warp a record again after it's been dewarped?
Sure. Yeah, I think absolutely. Yeah, if you don't correct what caused the warp in the first place, you absolutely can rebend or rewarp the record. So what do we do about it? Well, let's first talk a little bit about the two different types of warps. Because that actually feeds into what the best corrective action will be. So if we want to go back to the PowerPoint, Danny, I have an example here of a dish warp. Now, a dish warp is where you have a record that is uniformly warped from the edge to the center. So it's going to have a curve to it that's consistent around the circumference of the record. And you can see that as I play back this short video. You can see the gap between the platter and the bottom of the album because I have the convex side of the warped record facing the platter. If I were to have the concave side of the record on the platter, it would be flat at the edge, but it would cone up toward the center of it.
Yeah.
Now you compare that to an edge warp, which has a variability. You can see more of that up and down movement. And if you watch the video, sometimes it touches the platter and sometimes it doesn't. Now, how do you address warps? So what you essentially need to do is to gradually heat the record and put it between two flat surfaces. And then as you soften it with a controlled amount of heat over time and then cool it, you do that once or twice or three times, depending on the severity, and you can get the record to relax and flatten without damaging the grooves themselves. And to do that at PVF, we utilize a flattening machine called the Orb DF DI1A, or just the Orb. Really nice machine, very, very effective. Furu Tech for a while sold a version of the orb that performs in a similar fashion, but this has got a computer controlled algorithm in it. You can have three different temperature settings, depending on the severity of the warp. And then you can have both for 12-inch, 7-inch, and then 10 inches also can be flattened as well. It takes about 4 hours per cycle. But like I said, this machine is between $1,500 and $1,600 US retail. When you can find them, they're a little bit hard to consistently purchase, but they work very well. But it's hard for an individual record collector to justify that type of expense. So as we mentioned, PVF will flatten them as a service for $12. There's also other people out there that you can find on the web. Sometimes some better local record stores will have that service as well using a similar machine. Mm-hmm. But for those who can't justify a flattening machine, there are some lower cost solutions that they could purchase. Mm-hmm. So I've seen these approaches where you put steel plates and then you kind of clamp them together and you put them in your home oven. Mm-hmm. Now, okay, that's a fairly uncontrolled way to do it, but it's inexpensive to try it. And if you're doing it with a record that may not be super valuable, at the same time you want to try and save it, why not? It's kind of like the wood glue method for why not give it a try if you got nothing to lose and you don't want to send it somewhere to get cleaned. Mm-hmm. There is a similar product line. There's two companies that I know of, Vinyl Flat and a new one called Vinyl Pi. And I know the Vinyl Pi retails for somewhere between $275 to $350. It's that same records between two steel plates, except they've got a computer temperature controlled bag that you put them in, and it'll gradually increase the record and then gradually decrease the temperature. And it's doing kind of the same thing as the orb, just a little less sophisticated, I would say. I haven't tried them, so I can't say whether or not they work great or not, but it's interesting and you may want to check them out yourself. The last approach, it's more of a DIY thing. I've heard of people taking two glass plates, putting a record between them and putting the record in the sun. Man, I can't think of anything that has
or the oven.
You're right. What's less controlled than the oven? Well, just putting them out in the sun. Hey, give it a try. Let us know in the comments if you've tried any of those DIY approaches and how did it turn out for you.
My advice, strongly recommended, if you're going to do that, do it with a shitty, cheap dollar bin record. Because if you screw it up, man, you're not going to miss much. I wouldn't put my $500 ERC record in there or my Bill Evans box set. Which I guess brings up a different point, which is, of course, so you're actually obviously talking about fixing the problem at the point, the source, right? Which is obviously treating the record itself.
Right.
Then you, of course, have, being able to treat the problem on the playback side. And really, there's only two solutions that I found in my 20, 30 years of doing this hobby, which is you either have a vacuum hold down record player, which is an actual vacuum hold down system built into it. And, of course, we always like to think that this is some new magic technology that was developed recently. Of course, it's as old as, the light bulb itself, practically. I think probably the most famous of companies, Microseiki, did this back in the 60s and 70s. And, today you're looking at companies like Bergman, TechDOS, obviously, which of course is actually a spin-off from Microseiki. I forgot the guy's name. He actually was at Microseiki. So, there's obviously myriads of companies that are doing vacuum hold down. The other solution is what sort of VPI brought to market and really popularized. What's that?
They had that ring that went on the edge of the record that when you had it on the platter, it kind of put some weight on the edge.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was the ring. Sorry, light bulb moment here. Why is this? Is this you or me?
It's not me, man.
Where is this? Oh, clock timer. There we go. Stop. There. Sorry, we're setting a clock timer of 30 minutes because you guys complained about the fact that our last video went on an hour and a half. Can you imagine spending an hour and a half with two characters, more fun than Steve and myself? I mean,
I certainly can't. No way.
I can't.
No way, no
I
how.
know. I can't.
So let's show the audience a little bit of the outcomes, and I have a really important concept that I don't think gets discussed enough, and I have a visual for that. So here is a record I did recently for a very good client of mine, Roland Kirk, really nice record. It came in
Oh my
with
gosh! Look at
pretty
that.
significant edge work to it. And after a couple of cycles in the orb.
Wow. That is dramatic.
Yeah.
Go to the before. Cool. Holy cow. That is exactly what I'm talking about with the G-forces. Look at that. But play it again.
Sure.
The before. That's insane. That is literally insane. Can you imagine the G-forces that are already between 600 to 1200 Gs at the tip of your stylus being amplified by this warp? I mean, if that doesn't wear out your cartridge sooner than normal, I don't know what would. That's incredible. Wow.
And
that's aggressive.
That particular track is an up-tempo, fast-paced track, so you didn't have a lot of sustained notes to it. If that were a piano ballad, if it was orchestral, the same string, you would hear that. You would hear a significant warble to it.
Yeah.
Now, I want to share something with the audience that is really important, and that is the concept of when a record is flattened, it can actually cause more problems than if it's not flattened, and it happens in very specific situations. So if you have an edge warp and that edge warp has a very steep pitch to it, what actually happens is the vinyl is stretched outward to create the warp itself. And when you flatten a record, you aren't shrinking that stretched portion of the record back inward again. What you're doing is you're actually flattening that stretched part down, and that causes the record to bulge outward towards the circumference. And when that happens, the record will be flat. But watch the video and you'll see what I call an in and out kick or a tone arm shake.
Wow.
So this record is something that I actually purposely warped with a heat gun, junk record. No valuable records were harmed during the filming of this example.
Wow. Look at that.
That becomes really audible during playback. Now, here's another example of the in and out kick, the one that's got the Lyra Delos on it. You can see that tone arm notch in and out. And FYI, folks in SonicFlare land, if you're looking for great tracking cartridges, the Lyra line is fantastic.
Yes.
The Delos, I've got a couple different Hanas. I like them all. But the Delos will track 2 or 3 times better than my Hana Umami. And of course, the Lyra line is just filled with great cartridges. So that's what the last point I really thought what your audience would find interesting is flattening records. Cleaning records with a well-done process is minimally risky, right? whether at home or whether through PVF. But flattening records, the results are going to be a bit variable. The results can result in that in and out kick. Now, typically, if the edge warp has that severe bump in it, it's not playable to begin with. That first example where I used the heat gun to distort the record, the warp was so bad it would hit the tone arm before the cartridge would actually get to the warp.
Wow.
Anyhow, some things to keep in mind when you're selecting records to send in to get flattened, whether you try flattening them yourself, be aware of some of those potential outcomes.
Wow. Well, Steve, I have to tell you, another incredibly educational session with you, as they always are.
Yeah, good time,
thank you for enlightening us, the audience, and myself included. I have to say, there's a couple of things I picked up on that I really never thought of or debated internally myself. I think it's pretty clear to see and say that you have to deal with warp records, depending on the severity. I think the various solutions, the playback solutions that are out there, only mitigate the problem to a point.
Yeah.
And frankly, from my opinion and my expertise and personal experience, unless you have a very solid vacuum hold down record player, you're going to be stuck in some kind of record warp land. Because even record players that have the screw down clamp that, as I said earlier, was popularized by VPI, you're invariably going to end up with one or the other side that's not going to be able to get flattened with that washer sticking out by the spindle that raises the inner side of the record just a little bit so that the clamp can push the other side down, right? Great information as always. Thanks for coming on. Look forward to our next topic, TBD. Yeah. And, I think we did good, Steve. We're just about 36 minutes into this. So kudos.
Brevity is neither one of our strong points, but hopefully, again, the content is worth the audience sticking through to the end. I appreciate their time. I appreciate the time with you, Danny. Always enjoyable. And let's queue up the next topic and get together in the next week or so.
Love it. If you're following us on Discord, please join the community and feel free to join the conversation. We created an actual separate content site for Steve and his stuff on Perfect Vinyl Forever. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you guys soon. Ciao.
Take care, all.